Welcome back everyone. Today I'll be doing the trad witch tag by the Polish folk witch. A couple of months ago, the Polish folk witch created the trad witch tag, which is a series of about 10 questions, I think, and each practitioner of a traditional or folk path within witchcraft could answer these questions and share a bit more about their practice and their own spiritual beliefs and opinions on how their magical tradition functions. And if you don't already follow her, I would highly recommend you subscribe to the Polish folk witch. She's on here on YouTube and also on Instagram. And there she shares information on, shocker, Polish folk magic. So similarly, what I do with German folk magic, she does with Polish folk magic, especially southwestern Polish folk magic, i.e. Silesian folk magic, which to people like me with also a Silesian background who practice aspects of Silesian folk magic, that's really exciting, and it will maybe be exciting for you as well. So I'll link all of her socials down below. Some of these questions I've already answered in some other videos or over on my other social media like Instagram or TikTok, but I thought it'd be nice to have a single video here on YouTube where I give like a detailed rundown of each of these questions and each of these things that I get asked about a lot. So with that being said, let's jump right in. Well, the first question is, what kind of craft do you practice, i.e. folk magic, traditional witchcraft, Wicca, modern witchcraft, ceremonial magic, eclectic, occultism, etc. It will not come to a surprise to anyone that I practice mainly folk magic, and the majority of my practice is informed by the German cultural lens on folk magic. And I think it'd be good to differentiate the term folk magic from the other terms that are thrown around here, like, for example, traditional witchcraft or Wicca or modern witchcraft. So to me, in my humble opinion, folk magic is essentially the magic of the people. We hear this sentence repeated a lot across social media. The magic of the people, but what does that actually mean? In short, it means that people develop certain spiritual practices based on their culture, their surroundings, their landscape, their social economic situation, what they have available to them, and then use these spiritual or magical practices to bring about a desired change or outcome. This is just in the broadest sense of the term folk magic. This definition would also include practices that you might develop on your own in the modern day with modern appliances which are available to you. So magically charging your bottle with your medication in it by sprinkling a circle of salt around the bottle and saying a few prayers could be considered folk magic, which is, I think, something that not a lot of people think about when they hear the term folk magic. Most people will think of something very archaic and ancient, but it doesn't have to be. And in my opinion, the core of folk magic is evolving and keeping up to date. And this is perhaps also where folk magic would differentiate from traditional witchcraft. And in my understanding, traditional witchcraft is a form of a reconstructionist movement that seeks to reconstruct the spiritual rule practices of the people living, I think, just in Europe around the early modern period. I don't hear practitioners who work outside of a European witchcraft paradigm refer to their practice as traditional witchcraft. I'd be very interested in knowing if anyone does that, but from what I've gathered, traditional witchcraft is a very Eurocentric practice. So on one side we have folk magic, who kind of constantly reinvents itself, and then on the other side we have traditional witchcraft, which seeks to re-establish and reconstruct a presumed past incarnation of witchcraft. And if you go by that, there is not really a big difference between folk magic and what's here labeled as modern magic. I think that folk magic will more often look into the past for inspiration, while modern witchcraft only predominantly looks at the present situation, but again, that's just the vibe I'm getting. Okay, let's move on to the second question. What paradigm, faith, or philosophy informs your craft, i.e. spiritual model, animism, Neoplatonism, psychological approach, energy model, polytheism, etc. Out of all the things that were listed, I think animism fits as the core tenet of my practice pretty well. Many forms of folk magic are deeply animistic, and that's no different with German folk magic, and through that my practice has also some animistic tendencies. And if you don't know what animism is, in a very short explanation, it is the belief that some things have a spirit to them, things which are considered inanimate in our society. So for example, a specific rock or especially a plant would have a spirit, but also even diseases could have a spirit which needs to be exorcised somehow. And these are themes which pop up time and time again within German folk magic. We talk to the plants, we talk to the diseases, we talk to the evil spirits which try to cause us harm, we talk to the weather, basically. So we're always kind of negotiating with the magical world around us. But I'd also say that polytheism plays a role in my practice. And some of you might be thinking, wait, didn't you just say that animism is the core tenet of the practice? How can things be both animistic and polytheistic? Well, the line of thinking that things such as animism and polytheism are mutually exclusive and cannot be practiced at the same time is rooted in a very colonial and racist way of thinking. I do not want to give you a full rundown of the history since that's not the topic of this video, but to summarize, there was once a prick, basically a scientist called Edward B. Taylor, and he was the proponent of a theory called evolutionism, that societies develop from a stage of savagery to a enlightened scientific worldview. And of course, he put Western society, his society, at the top of this imaginary evolutionary course, and the cultures of the people that were colonized by his society at the very bottom. And in between, he kind of thought that this savage animism would develop into a bit less savage polytheism, and then eventually become enlightened and develop into monotheism and into structures which could be compared to Western Christianity. But in typical fashion for racists, he was deeply wrong. This entire thing was just a bunch of bullshit, basically, and many societies, even societies within Europe, within the past and sometimes even within the present, have both polytheistic and animistic worldviews at the same time. They don't evolve into each other. You can have a connection to the spiritual world and still believe in some form of greater spiritual deities. I could also go into relativism and how each culture should be kind of viewed as its own separate thing and not constantly be compared with other cultures. But again, this is a bit of a too large topic to cover in here. Speaking of topic, let's get back to the topic at hand. Question 3. What culture/cultures is your practice rooted in? As I've already stated, my practice is mainly rooted in German culture, specifically North or Northwestern German culture. But I also take inspiration from Silesian culture. And I could have a big discussion into if Silesian culture is just a part of German culture, or is it just a part of Polish or Czech culture, but I'm just gonna say it's Silesian culture, because we've had the problem of being sorted into either category for the longest time, and also this categorization caused a lot of trauma within Silesian societies and Silesian people. So I won't be doing that, so I'm just going to say Silesian culture is where I take my inspiration from. But I could give you a more specific answer with where in Silesia I take inspiration from. So when it comes to Silesia, I take information from a South Silesian type of folk magic. It was practiced around the county of 𝔖𝔬𝔬𝔢𝔨 or Glatz, and also neighboring regions, be they Slavic or more German. The name of this folk magic is called Pillweiserei and is especially centers around herbs, because if you didn't know, Silesia has a very big history with herbal healers. But I'm not going to share all of the information on that today. I'm planning on making a special video for that. On the northwestern German side, where I take the majority of information on my folk magic from, This practice is called 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫 and I've already made an entire video about that practice, and I'll link that somewhere here or in the description. But to quickly go over it, 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫 centers especially on divination, foretelling the future either through visions, through special rituals, on liminal times of year, or on specific divination tools like card reading. Question 4. How long have you been practicing and how did it all start? Basically, I've been consciously practicing since I think 2018. Before that I did some practices related to that, but I just didn't register it as witchcraft or magic. That has mostly to do with the sentiment that I grew up with this practice not being magic or magical or witchcraft. It's just the things we do. And it was only later where I realized that there's something witchy about this. And then of course I started researching witchcraft. I researched the history of witchcraft, the spiritual communities online. I researched Wicca, I researched things like the Golden Dawn, and I kind of looked into each of the practices which commonly exist, only to later come back into German folk magic or northwestern German folk magic and go very deep into research on that. Question number 5. What books or resources have you first started with? Would you recommend them to others today? One of the first resources that I had was, of course, YouTube. And I used YouTube in the beginning not to research northwestern folk magic specifically, but just anything about witchcraft that I could get my hands on. And one of the first YouTubers that got me interested in this stuff and that I regularly kept up with was 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫. She might be a bit contested nowadays, and I have my own very strong critiques of her and the content that she put out, but she was one of the first people that kind of put witchcraft on the map for me. I don't know necessarily if I would recommend her channel today. I think I still have this part of me that is very nostalgic about her content. Nowadays there are better resources for beginners. For example, the YouTube channel of Frankie, Chaotic Witch Aunt, which is something that I highly recommend to beginners, but also everyone. I think everyone who's into any form of spirituality or witchcraft could gain some insight and some new information by watching Frankie's content. Also, they follow me on Instagram and Twitter also, I believe. I felt so freaking famous when they followed me, you don't understand. But when it comes to books, one of the first resources that I had was, I think also by 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫, her book Wicca? I have it over there. Yeah, it's just called Wicca, I think. And no, I would definitely not recommend this book for modern practitioners. There are some good things in it, especially when it comes to mental health and the craft, which at the time when this book came out was probably very revolutionary in a way. But there are some very blatant pieces of misinformation in this book when it comes to like historical practices. And these just rub me the wrong way. So I'd say again that nowadays there are better resources out there. I don't have a new book which is really good for beginners. One that pops into my head right away would be maybe Psychic Witch by Matt Oren, but I'm not sure if that's like the book that I would give to beginners that absolutely have no idea about witchcraft or anything. I've heard that Frankie's book is really good, but I haven't read it myself yet. But I also think that Ella Harrison's book is something that is very beginner friendly, although I also have not read that yet. So take my recommendations with a grain of salt. Question number 6. How has your practice and/or paradigm changed over the years, if at all? I think that in the beginning I tried to recreate more popular forms of witchcraft that I saw online. For example, I tried casting a circle the Wiccan way because that's all that I had access to, and I thought, well, everyone's doing it. This is probably how it's right, and this is how I should do it, and this is the only way. And over time, when I started researching more German folk magic again and kind of come back to my roots, I dropped a lot of this stuff. I don't cast circles anymore, or not really in the way that the Wiccans do, I'll still prepare the space where I'll be working magic on, but not in this very ritualistic kind of way. Also, I have moved a bit further away from deity work and moved more towards ancestor veneration. Witchcraft Online in the beginning gave me the idea that everyone needed to work with deities and that working with deities was more or less essential, but I've come to realize that the deities that I work with in my practice, at least to me, aren't as close and tangible. There are more forces of nature that need to be dealt with and sometimes can be persuaded, but not necessarily something that I deeply work with on a regular basis. That's more what my ancestors are for. Question number 7. What does your daily/regular practice look like? What do you do on a regular basis? So one thing that I'll always do every day, no matter what, is going up to my ancestor altar right before I go to bed, and I say a little prayer to them, thanking them for protecting me. And this is something that I've done regularly for a couple of years now. And this only takes a couple of seconds, which is precisely why I think I've been able to keep this up for such a long time. Because when it comes to a daily practice, I often don't have the energy or the time to do like elaborate rituals for my ancestors or my deities or the land spirits, etc. I only maybe have energy to do a quick little prayer, and that's enough. That's enough to keep that line going, to keep the connection open. When it then comes to more in-depth things, such as doing a spell or doing lots of divination and things that require a lot of help, I will of course give my ancestors more time, more devotion, offerings, for example. But this daily practice of just doing a quick little prayer has really helped me through many years now. Question number 8. Are there aspects of your craft that you need to keep secret? In your opinion, is secrecy important in witchcraft? I'm not sure if there's necessarily something that I need to keep secret, but there are certainly things which I like to keep secret, especially from people online. As of this point, I'm a bit uncomfortable with sharing pictures of my ancestors online, and I also won't go into the messages that they give me or the things that I want to inquire from them. And I don't necessarily have a really thought out and logical reason for why I'm doing this. It's just the vibes that I'm getting, that I want to keep this relationship very close to me. And I honestly think that when it comes to witchcraft, in most forms, secrecy is important. Of course, your practice is your practice and you can do whatever you want, but for my practice, secrecy is important, I think. Whenever I do spells, I don't go boasting about them beforehand or during them, and I only maybe talk about them after they've done their job. And this is connected to the belief in German folk magic that anyone could throw the evil eye at you, especially when you have big things coming up, like a spell, for example. So I don't want anyone meddling with that, even perhaps if they don't intend to. You can send evil eye even if you don't want to harm the person. But you know, still, I keep this stuff mostly to myself. The things that I share online are mostly things that can be researched, that I have read in books and sources, and through that they aren't as personal to me, and that's why I feel comfortable sharing them. Question number 9. What are some of your favorite tools that you use regularly? I don't use tools that regularly because right now I have so much going on with putting out content and making it through university that I rarely have time to work in witchcraft in a way which would require me to use tools. But let's say if I have a bunch of free time for myself and I get back into my craft really deep, the tools that I would mostly use, I think, are my cards for card divination. So my tarot cards, my Kipperkarten. But besides that, I think the rosary and especially candles are a big part in my practice. I use the rosary mainly to connect to saints, especially Saint Mary. And not Saint Mary in the pure Christian form of her, but in her syncretized form with a great Germanic goddess, which might have been Holder, which might have been someone else, but to the more regional paganisque version of Mary. And of course, candles are big for my ancestors. So yeah, cards for divination, the rosary, and candles are probably the most frequently used tools in my craft when I get around to it. And the last question, question number 10. What books or resources would you recommend to newbie witches interested in your kind of craft? Again, I've made a video on that, shocker. But if you are interested in German folk magic, I'm only able to give you resources for my specific practice from northwestern folk magic. If you want to learn more about central German folk magic or southern German folk magic, I won't be that big of a help to you. The thing that I would recommend to you is researching local folklore. And that's something that you would have to do on your own. Look for books with German folklore from the region that you're interested in. Look for plant guides for the regions that you're interested in. If you have the opportunity, go to these regions and take a walk in nature and see what kind of plants you can find. What are some predominant features of the landscape? I feel like a broken record at this point, but I cannot overstate the amount of information that you'll be able to gather just by reading folklore and going on a walk. Land connectedness is such a big theme in many branches of folk magic, especially German folk magic. And by connecting to the land and the stories and the folklore that the people tell about this land, you can learn so much about local folk magic traditions. And if you want to go on further, you can always look up ethnographic texts about the area that you're interested in. Most likely there will have been ethnographers or anthropologists which researched local folk traditions there before, but these texts are always a bit more tricky to find, so I would start with the folklore and going on a walk, and then maybe working yourself up to something more dry and scientific. And this is all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I recommend again to check out the Polish folk witch and her original video about this tag, and the videos of other people under this tag. And all my socials are also in the description, where you can keep up with me and my content when I'm not posting here. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. 𔖭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨